Good evening, and welcome back to Metallic Miasma. I am your hostess, number 7. Our story tonight comes from one who prefers to be identified only as Shiro Ryū. Please sit back, relax, and fear. Dr. Adrian Gray was, by my opinion and many of my colleagues, a brilliant man. His research was extensive and restless. The man had spent nearly his entire life on one endeavor: immortality. This goal does not make his work less credible or even less repeatable. The only reason his experiments were so hard to repeat was that every drug and every machine cost a small fortune. Those kinds of resources don't normally come from a standard government grant. You need private funding for that. I began following him after reading a newspaper article from a competing office in the South Bronx. My entire adult life, I've been a reporter for a small newspaper in Manhattan. The headline concerning Dr. Gray was as follows: Scientist discovers rapid aging formula. It wasn't front-page news or even second-page news, but a small article on the third page. Nevertheless, it piqued my curiosity. The article read, "After years of research, Dr. Adrian Gray has created a drug and diet system that aged mice from newborns to adults in less than a day. I hope that one day I can help reverse this process instead of speeding it along," says the scientist. Since that article, I began begging my superiors for the chance to report on this man's findings. Every week he seemed to be up to something. One day, it was a discovery of cellular melanin control centers. Next week, it was rapid muscle growth. He even successfully mapped the human hippocampus. The man had quite a gift, and quite a lot of funding. After about a year of begging, the editor-in-chief called me into his office. "Mr. Stevenson," he said, "your little fascination with this odd character tempted me to pass over this opportunity, but we need something substantial soon. And you're my most seasoned journalist. I know that you can keep a cool head on this one." "Yes, sir. I will, sir," I replied. I was to schedule an interview regarding a new project of his, one with private funding, as per his usual experimentation. It seemed that Dr. Gray wanted everyone to know about this project, including small-time newspapers, so I did so promptly. "Dr. Gray, what will this new project involve?" I asked in the interview. "Well, Mr. Stevenson," he started. "Kurt, sir," I interrupted. "Well, Kurt, like the name implies, the human repair system will completely cure a person of all ailments." "How does it work?" I asked. "I cannot and will not say. Those interested in purchasing the repairs must sign a waiver removing all liability from me in the event of a catastrophe. The way my machine works will never be made known to the public. The process can be, to a minimal extent, known, and I'm sure those with capital who have life-threatening diseases will find the $1 million easier to part with than their lives," he said grimly. "What exactly does the process entail, Dr. Gray?" "First, we composite a full-body image. Pictures are taken of the patient's whole body, front and back. Next, we take fingerprints. Finally, you'll enter the machine, and 12 hours later, you'll emerge void of any ailment whatsoever." "How did you build this machine, Dr. Gray? Who funded you?" I asked. "I take any donations I can get, and several are rather large entities that have made a wise investment. Effectively, Mr. Stevenson, I have cured AIDS and all life-threatening diseases on this planet. All people have to do is get in line, sign a waiver, and pay me to rid themselves of all of their afflictions." The papers went out. "Dr. Gray builds miracle machine. Our success built off his, and we beat out our competitors because I made one interview." But something seemed wrong. This was too good to be true. Of course, I didn't have the money to find out, nor did I have any life-threatening ailments. But Dr. Gray's machine piqued my curiosity, as so much of his work had done before. There were many more interviews between us, and we were his main advertisement. The first man to try out the machine was a dying benefactor, rich from inheritance and desperate to beat his disease. He contacted Dr. Gray via an article's information from our newspaper. People said he was changed when he came out. He did everything with slightly different mannerisms, and his personality was different. But aside from that, he was more or less the same, healthier than he had ever been. He even seemed a bit younger. Soon, people were coming from all over, emerging a bit different, but healthy. Dr. Gray built a large, secure facility with dozens of workers, none of whom were allowed to understand what they were doing, if they did anything with the machine, and all were sworn to secrecy. I knew this because I spied on them. I had to. I just couldn't take it. Everyone that comes out of this machine, everyone, seems younger, more energetic, and stronger. Dr. Gray was none of these things. He even suffered from a persistent cough soon after his machine gained fame. Why didn't he cure himself of it? Of course, it was minor and may not have been worth whatever resources the machine used, but he still coughed. We were his outlet to the press. I was the man who made him famous. I saw him for every interview, every appearance, as he grew sicker. He invented it. How could the man who cured the world seem so old and unhealthy? As a reporter, I gained many skills necessary to infiltrate a secure facility. Rule number 1, there's always a way to talk your way in. Rule number 2, if rule number 1 fails, look for a smoker's entrance. I had to. He piqued my curiosity. I breathed the lingering remnants of the last smoker's cigarette. I was on the other side of a corner that he had never walked past. It was 8 o'clock on a Friday, and no one felt like coughing up $1 million for quite a while. I figured everything was routine maintenance. I also knew that this smoker clocked out 10 minutes after his last cigarette on Friday nights. After he went inside, I came from around the corner, hugging the wall, and stopped the door with a thick twig. I waited for exactly 10 minutes, and then entered. Deep into the facility, past the large, full-body cameras and with the fingerprint scanners they had set up for processing, I saw it. HRS engraved into the top of a large metal door into a large room. This was it. This was the human repair system. I walked around the machine. Steel walls surrounded the entire thing. Nearby was a stairwell leading to a lower level. Perhaps, I thought, the answers were down there? After that, I would brave the machine itself, if I had to. He piqued my curiosity. I started to slowly creep down the stairs when I heard the eeriest of noises. It sounded like sobbing. It grew louder as I crept further down. I moved slowly and quietly. Then I began to hear whispers, low but audible. It was Dr. Gray. He was talking to somebody. Himself, maybe? I just couldn't tell. As they grew louder, I began to make out what he was saying. So much money, so much I've lost and given and gained, and we're no closer to immortality. It's hopeless. I would have been terrified of being caught at this point, but I was more disturbed by that basement than anything. Something smelled funny. Wrong. Very wrong. Smelled like a slaughterhouse down here. I rounded a corner and saw the most grotesque thing I have ever laid my eyes on. It looked like a severed, taxidermied head. It almost looked like his first customer. But he was alive, wasn't he? I reported on him. I met him once. I stood there in shock. Instinctively, I murmured, "What the fuck?" But just then, the doctor turned and his eyes met mine. I saw fear, rage, and tears in his old angry face. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't know where to go, so I opened the first door that I could, and ran inside. It was cold in the room I wound up in. I was in a freezer. test tubes surrounded me. I peeked out of the window of the freezer at the madman outside. "Curiosity killed the cat, Mr. Stevenson. I'm afraid the egg room is now your tomb." Egg room, I thought? It was getting colder. He must have turned an outside dial. I took a look out of that little window. He was gone. Tried the door. Nothing. I was trapped in a freezing egg room. All these test tubes held eggs? For what? What could the machine possibly need eggs for? And what kind of eggs were they? I didn't have time for these questions now. I had to think. He probably makes his workers sign away their rights when they start working for him, so they don't have to reveal anything that may explain how the machine works. But he would not want a dead worker on his hands. There had to be a safety release latch somewhere. I started looking. Bingo. A pull right on the door. I turned it and pushed. No dice. The door was caught on something. I finally managed to make an opening big enough to see what it was. A wooden plank between the bars on the door and the wall next to it held me in place. I picked up a plastic graduated cylinder and proceeded to tear it down the middle with my fingers. I cut myself deep on its edges. Bleeding and in pain, I pushed the smaller half through the slit and slowly moved the plank out from the bars by alternating pushing on the door and the cylinder. At length, I earned my freedom and, clutching my wound, escaped the egg room. The doctor would likely still be here, eager to dispose of my body once I was dead. I had to leave. I crept back down the hall toward the madman's taxidermied companion, which I preferred to forget about. I slowly climbed the stairs and gauged at the HRS one last time. That big, beautiful creation. I had to know, so I resolved to look inside. I'm here anyway, bleeding and terrified, but he piqued my curiosity a long time ago. I found myself in a room much smaller than what the HRS appeared as from the outside, and in front of me was a series of human-shaped molds. They all seemed to fit the typical size of a person. Instructions above them read, "Stand in the mold closest to your size and then face the door." Was there a latch? There were no windows for workers to see from the outside, so what would happen and how? I dared not step into my mold. I didn't know what would happen. I examined them as closely as I could. The madman thought I was dead. He wouldn't bother me now. Looking under the lip of the molds, where a man might place the top of his head, I found a button. I pressed one as quickly as I saw it and removed my hand. A whirring saw came from the neck of the mold as if to behead the patient and caught the back of the end of my good wrist. Both hands bleeding, I clutched them and cried out in pain. The mold shifted to drop the non-existent body and head to the lower level, and I felt a vacuum suck the blood from my wrist. Searing and agonizing pain took me over as I fell into the chamber below, and the mold shut overhead. The slaughterhouse smell was back, this time stronger than ever. I looked around the stinking, smelling pit of filth and darkness. Blind, I lit a match. What I saw in the dim, flickering light was the most horrible thing I would ever behold. White, bloodless, stinking corpses and heads all around me. A robotic arm came out of the darkness and took one, and I followed it out of the box of bodies into another chamber of this horrific basement. The arm took the body to another lidless metal box and dropped it in. I heard it grind the headless body and heard bones snap. Moments later, a second body and head were ground up as well. Tubes from the bottom of this human wood chipper sent a liquid into yet another chamber, and I saw, finally, by the flickering of a second and third match, why they had the egg room. A pair of needles shot into a vat of some green liquid and came together. For hours I stood in that basement, watching a human baby grow in that large, green, glowing vat. On a monitor next to the creature, red warnings appeared saying, "Surrogate brain from storage used. Hippocampus from subject not found." I began to see the creature take form, It started to look exactly like me. Another warning shot across the screen. Pigmentation images not found. Melanin dispersed naturally. Fingerprint scans not detected. No artificial fingerprints grown. He was making clones. No one who went into this machine lived. They were beheaded and cloned. Their memories were implanted into the brain of a human being that was only 12 hours old. I shook uncontrollably. The blood dripped from my wrist and fingers. I couldn't believe how many people came in here expecting to be cured, only to be murdered, gruesomely beheaded, and then nobody ever knew that they had even died. I fell on the ground. Sitting uncomfortably against a concrete wall, I nodded off from this nightmare on account of my shock and my blood loss into another half-dozen of my own. When I awoke, I saw the muzzle of a revolver in my face. I tried to move, but found myself bound. Behind the revolver was the madman that started it all, the good Dr. Adrian Gray. "Mr. Stevenson," he said, "I'm afraid your clone had to be executed and added to the stock of meat from whence it was born. I did lose another body feeding it, though, so I'll need to replace that one. Don't worry, I won't shoot you in the head. I should like to add the scan of your brain to my emergency list of surrogates." "Did you think I'd let you live, Mr. Stevenson? You'd be bad for business. And this money will someday cure the world. More specifically me, of the ultimate illness, mortality." Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, and subscribe for more.